Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm Dean, a PhD student at the Institute for Christian Studies in Toronto, and I study religion and media and technology and this podcast.
That's a good brand. That's the best brand I've ever heard. I'm Matt. I work at Greenville University. I teach media studies and communication there. My research interests are, media archaeology, ghosts, pizza, and I like thinking about class struggle.
Oh dang!
That's my new brand, my evolving brand.
It's a good one. It's a very good brand. You gotta give me some brand
evolving. Buzzwords, hashtags, monetization.
Hashtag spooky pizza. Hashtag class struggle.
Yeah, man, all that good stuff right there. Got to get it on front loaded. SEO. That's another one. Think about that word.
When are they gonna have emoji search engine optimization?
Wait, how would that work?
I don't know, man. Like if you use a lot of spooky pizza emojis, maybe that's the kind of thing someone's into.
Oh, so you could like search people by emoji?
Yeah, frequency, deliberate combinations, that sort of thing. It's just brand building.
Yeah, if you think about it. Okay.
I'm not going to think about it.
That is a $1 million idea out there, so somebody give us that money.
Yeah, or do it and we'll litigate you later.
Or do it and we'll probably just ignore it.
Yeah, we'll forget about it.
Cool. Well, last week we tried to think through the events of Charlottesville, especially the violence of white supremacy and strategies for anti-fascism. That means, though, that we have a bunch of listener stuff piled up that we haven't gotten to in a while, and some Christianity and Socialism 101 stuff to talk about. This week we've got iTunes reviews, but also, believe it or not, some real-life voicemails. People actually took us up on this and called us and left us questions. That's wild. Thank you so much for doing that. Well, so after we go through those, we'll move on and talk about revolution and what Marx thinks about them. So this is sort of like a 101 on revolutions episode. So if you don't know anything about Marx and revolutions, I guess get ready, because we're gonna force it. We're gonna force it into your brain. Unless you turn this off, then we can't. So we'll also talk about revolutions, I guess, from a Christian perspective, because, again, that's part of our brand that we are building and monetizing, SEO, hashtags, etc. And we'll even get a little help from our friendly neighborhood lit guy to tell us about Marx's theory of revolution. Cool. So before we do that, though, let's just talk and see what we've been up to. Dean, what have you been doing?
Yesterday, or recently anyway, I went to a corn boil. That was really cool. It is what it sounds like, a place that boiled corn. Emily is a nanny, and she used to work for this family, and they do this corn boil every year, and that was very good. So ate a lot of corn with some very fancy butter. That was the key. The fancy butter is what makes all the difference. Thai lemongrass butter, that was the winner of the night, I think.
That's literally the wildest thing I've ever heard in my entire life.
Yeah, man, corn boil.
It's like a very Midwestern version of a crab boil or something.
Yeah, exactly. But in the middle of the city, so very funny.
Right.
Also, a cool thing that happened, though, cooler than the corn boil, dare I say, is I hung out with this guy named Hank Hart all day today with my supervisor, Ron Kuipers at ICS. And Hank Hart is basically the guy who founded my school, more or less. But he is in his 80s and extremely cool. And I talked to him a bunch about teaching and how he used to teach briefly in South Africa, before apartheid was over. And that was wild.
Yeah, man.
So that was really neat.
Yikes. Cool. That sounds like a good time.
Yeah, I mean, apartheid was not neat, but...
No. But hang out with Hank Hart is cool.
Yeah.
No, apartheid is the opposite. Cool.
Yeah, exactly. One very good story that I should share is... He's telling me the story of giving this lecture, some boring philosophy lecture about the truth, and Hank Hart is a pragmatist. So he was talking about pragmatism and truth, and he was like, yeah, so pragmatists, we say the truth is a thing that you do. And he said after that, a bunch of people came up to him and they were like, so you really think the truth is something we do? And he said, yeah, sure, that's my research. And he left, and then that night they burned down the place that he gave the lecture at and destroyed it on the premise that like that was the truth speaking justice, to burn down like a institution in protest of apartheid. And he was like, yeah, that's exactly what I mean. So kudos to Hank Hart for inciting massive property damage by giving a philosophy lecture. Yeah, so anyway, what have you been up to, Matt? Corn boils in your recent past, 80-year-old philosophers, what's going on with you?
Surprisingly, no corn boils. Hey, so this actually happened last week, but we didn't do this. We didn't include this in the episode last week, so I want to make sure everyone hears it, because I think it's a good story. Maybe it's not a good story, but it's a story about my life. So, here it is.
I'm ready.
Yeah, good. So, my wife and I were included in a workplace outing, which was horrifying. It was a very bad time. It was okay. Let me clarify. It was a very we got to eat and hang out with people, and eating and hanging out is very good, and I don't mind that part at all. But after we ate and hung out, we had to see a Christian comedian, and that was very bad. So if you follow me on Twitter, you know all about this already. But I'll just say it again, because maybe you don't follow me on Twitter. Maybe you should, though, because I need to get to 1,000 real soon. Anyways, so we go to this Christian comedian, and it's in in a very small town, and it's in the small town's junior high auditorium. So it's the seats are way too small for normal sized people. And it's also very sweaty, and I don't know if that's part of the middle school or if it's just it's hot out. I don't know which.
That's just a time in people's lives to be sweaty for the first time.
It's just that's the best idea, actually, is making a middle school intentionally sweaty. Doing everyone a favor there. Anyways, so this comedian starts, and I don't know, it's a Christian comedian, so I knew going into it, it's this is probably not going to be very funny. Or if it is, it's just whatever, not very good funny stuff. Anyway, so the guy starts off, and it's exactly what you'd expect from a Christian comedian. Oh man, isn't it weird that Baptists do this? And oh man, isn't it weird that Nazarenes do this? That's my Southern Illinois voice, by the way. Anyways, so yeah, it is weird that Baptists do that. Whoa, so funny. And then he told the joke about Hobby Lobby. Y'all like Hobby Lobby? Everyone was like, yeah, we love it. We love Hobby Lobby.
We hate contraceptives.
Yeah, I know, right? That was basically it. And then he started making these really increasingly more offensive jokes. And I like to think of myself as someone who can take a lot of unfunny and very offensive material, and I think I am one of those type of people, but I also just didn't want to deal with it, and I was very annoyed by it. Okay. So he started making these jokes about how people who work minimum wage jobs don't actually deserve more money. And that's not actually a very funny joke, because that's I don't know, misanthropic and classist and very stupid.
And also very ironic coming from a Christian comedian at a middle school.
Yeah, I know, right?
If anyone doesn't deserve money for what they're doing,
it's actually him. Yeah, I agree with you. What was really annoying to me was so he kept making these jokes. It's well, do you really think the guy at the Taco Bell drive-thru deserves more money? And it's well, I mean, yeah, probably. I don't know. And it's just also weird, because the only job he could mention that made minimum wage were fast food workers. And if that dude thinks that the only people that make minimum wage are fast food workers, he is living on another planet. Oh, that's so dumb.
Christian planet.
Yeah, the Christian planet, Hobby Lobby planet. They got a belt of Christian knickknacks that float around the planet like rings.
Yeah. It's a Christian planet sponsored by Hobby Lobby, also sponsored by Chick-fil-A.
Oh my god, that sounds terrible. Okay, so that was an annoying joke, and my wife looked at me at that moment, and she's like, "Do you want to go?" And I was just like, let's just stay, because I don't know, we're with people she works with, and it's how weird would that be if we just left? So anyways, we stayed for a little bit longer, and then he said he got really misanthropic in his comedy routine. Got really misanthropic, and he was just "Oh man, people are so dumb, right? People, they're just so stupid."
I remember that in the Gospels, actually.
Yeah, Jesus was dude, people are idiots.
Get a lot of these guys.
And then like, well, anyway, so he's like talking about how stupid people are, making these like kind of stupid, I don't know, jokes, whatever. Anyways, then he says this thing, and it's supposed to be shocking and edgy, but it was really just in bad taste. So then he's just like, man, I wish we would just really go to war with North Korea, and like specifically said like nuclear war like wasn't a bad idea, like so that like some of the stupid people would die. That was like the implication, right? And like then I looked at my wife and I was like, all right, now I'm ready to go. Like this is just this is too much. Anyways, so it was a really unfortunate like sort of comedy set. I don't want to mention his name because I don't want to like I don't know if there's drama that can result in that. Anyways, if you want to know who he is, just look at my Twitter account from a few weeks ago. You can find out. But all in all, I mean, pretty on brand for Christians, I guess. First of all, like making stupid jokes, hating people, and being pro-war. I guess that's very on brand. But it was a super annoying night. And we ate ice cream afterwards, and it was good. So at least we got ice cream.
Yeah. I'm sorry that happened to you, but I'm glad there's a happy ending. I appreciate that you included that detail, because that would have been a huge bummer with that.
Right. No, I mean, so we got ice cream, though, so it's cool. But Christian comedians, can you just stop? Like, could you just not... could you not do it anymore? Oh my God. Okay, so this is the best part. This might actually give away who he is if you follow Christian comedians. His tagline is... I'm not praying for that. Like, the idea is that
awesome.
like people ask you to pray for stupid stuff, and he's just like, I'm not. He has like this whole like sort of like Jeff Foxworthy kind of situation where he's like, I'm not praying for that, and like,
I wish I had a job that didn't pay minimum wage. I'm not praying for that. I wish I didn't die in a nuclear holocaust. I'm not praying for that.
I'm just not doing it. Yeah, so Christian comedians could you stop contributing to the badness and evil in the world, because you're part of it, and probably you're responsible for most of it, honestly. Anyways, I'm gonna see if we can get this guy on the show under sort of some like false pretenses, and then just tear him a new one.
We need to get him and Derek Ford on the show, because
God.
Derek just went to the DPRK. By the way, that's exciting. Shout out to Derek for
super exciting,
bringing a bunch of cool photographs back. That was really neat.
Yeah. If you don't, you should follow Derek on Twitter and look at all the neat pictures and videos and commentary he gave, because it's super fascinating.
Yeah, it is. Holy cow.
Lots of good stuff to think of. I mean, if you are a person who is really... interested in anti-imperialism. First of all, you should be. And anyways, if you're interested in that kind of thing, you should look at these pictures, because they tell you a lot, I think, about the DPRK and sort of the ways that American or U.S. media trashes it. So
yeah, that's right.
Check those out. Anyways, it'd be great to have those people talk, because because Derek could set them straight.
So Matt, I hear that we have some iTunes reviews.
Oh yeah, we got two new reviews.
That's great.
If it's not clear to you, you guys need to leave us reviews on iTunes with 5 stars only. And that'll make it better. Just in general, that'll make the show better.
That's true.
Because more people will see it. I don't know. I think iTunes pays attention to this kind of stuff, so good reviews helps us out. If you have a bad review, maybe just keep that to yourself.
Yeah, you don't have to help us with that one, actually.
Nah, you could. I mean, constructive criticism is great, but not on iTunes. So just keep it to yourself, and maybe you could message us or whatever and tell us.
Send us a 1-star email. Yeah,
that's right, a 1-star email. But just if you got something good to say, get that on iTunes. Okay, so here's the first review. This is a little bit old. They're both a little bit old, but I don't know. Sorry, we've been doing other stuff. Okay, so the first review is a 5 out of 5-star review by a username Speedizzle or Speedizzle or Speedizzle. I can't really tell. I messed up Caleb Butler's name, so I'll probably mess up this person's name too. But it's unconventional, so what can you say? All right, so Speedizzle on July 27, 2017 says, "Hey Dean, hey Matt, just stopped by to give you my first ever podcast review. Thank you. That's good.
That's good.
Podcast reviews are important. Again, let me reemphasize. Okay, Ben Searchin left his podcast for a more religious take and have listened to just about every Elizabeth Brunig guest slot on a variety of podcasts. Nice. Okay, cool. And, at Daniel J. Camacho tweeted about this guest stint. I downloaded the podcast and have been very impressed with what I've heard so far. Good, so far.
Just wait till you get to the first episode. Those feelings will go right away.
Yeah, I mean, everyone hates that universally. Or we do, at least. To be fair, I have not listened to the earlier episodes, which apparently have earned a bad reputation on this review board. Yup! Yeah, we don't like them. No one likes them. They're all bad. You can't hear it. Whatever. It's the first episode. What are you gonna? That's just how it is. Okay, I really appreciate the framework and analysis you provide to Christian left issues, particularly as they intersect with our culture, or with our current world. As the grandchild of liberation theology ministers from Latin America, that is cool as hell. Oh my god,
I like that.
Yeah,
you should have a podcast.
Yeah, no kidding. Well. Probably more interesting than us. Anyways, it's fantastic to see you out spreading the good news of a Christian praxis rooted in solidarity with the poor. Yeah. I hope you continue your podcast and look forward to joining your reading group. We're going to have more in the future. Keep an eye out. If you would be so inclined, I'd love to hear a current minister's take on liberation, etc. I don't think either of you are ordained. Nope, not even a little bit. No. In particular, I'd like to see you take on James Cone and its current relevance with Black Lives Matter. Anyways, for this messy leftist Christian, your podcast has been a great find. Would highly recommend to whomever is open both to Christianity and left/center left politics. Thanks. Would love to talk with you more. Cool. Thank you so much. If you want a James Cone episode, I mean, that would be cool. I'd be very into it. You should start off, though, listening to the Maria Shea Armstrong episode we did a few weeks back.
That's
right. She mentions James Cone, but has a very good, similar kind of thing going on. Cool. That was a very nice review.
Yeah, that's a good upbeat, encouraging word. So more of those, please.
Yeah. Okay, we have one more. Is it okay if I read the second one?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so this is also a 5-star review, so that's very good. This one's called Good Find, 5 to 5 stars, by Jacob. Jacob says, a great resource, filling a void in the podcast verse, like universe, but podcast verse. Okay.
No, not only are we're not speaking into the void, we're filling one.
We're just there. And Jacob says, thanks to you both. That was nice, short, and sweet. Yeah, this could be interpreted a few ways, I think, right? We're filling a void. Like, all this person's really saying is, like, first of all, thank you, and then also, you're filling a space. So, it's not like...
It's just a cosmic problem. It's like a physics problem.
Right. It's not like, hey, this is great content. It's like, hey, you exist and I appreciate it.
Yeah, so finally, somebody finally filled this up. I was really upset about it, and I can rest easy now, going to bed knowing that particular void has finally been filled.
Sort of one more piece of the puzzle being filled in.
Just doing our part.
Just doing our part to create the totality of knowledge.
iTunes reviews are very good. Please send us more of those. But also, a thing that is very good is voicemails. We set up this voicemail inbox a long time ago, and we were asking people to send us stuff. And 2 people did in the same week. And then we had to wait because a bunch of stuff happened, and the Charlottesville thing happened. And so now we're finally getting back to them. So that's pretty great. Do you want to... Matt, do you want to just roll it?
Roll that beautiful bean footage.
Hi, Dean and Matt. This is Drew Van Land. I just wanted to thank you for your recent episode on morality. It's got me thinking kind of more on some things that have been on my mind lately about progressivism, leftism, radicalism, and ethics. So the first thing I was wondering is, don't progressives already take kind of a moral stance towards political issues? And maybe isn't that part of the problem in terms of thinking strategically? I'm thinking of meme culture in particular. I think we're really good at putting together incisive, satirical but moral, pithy arguments in service of political ends, which gets us accused of, being bleeding heart liberals versus, a rational, hard-headed conservative mindset. So that's my first thought is this something new? Isn't this something we're doing already? My second thought was, what is the ethical perspective that's being adopted in certain sectors of the left? it sometimes seems confused to me. My own ethical take is certainly kind of a confusing morass I'm still trying to work through. But what I sense a lot of times in progressivism is some kind of utilitarian principle mingled with care ethic rhetoric that nonetheless kind of bleeds over into deontological judgment of individual motives. And then finally, I'm wondering about some moral ambiguity regarding like systemic versus individual issues. I have some questions about agency when it comes to the causal circle between individuals and society. And then the distinction between politics and ethics more generally, the difference between justice, obligations, and social issues versus more of a individual kind of supererogatory, self-giving, kind of above and beyond just the norms of what we owe to others. So those are some of my thoughts. Thanks so much for thinking through these things carefully and thoughtfully. Peace.
First, cool. It's good to hear from Drew. That's nice that he called
us. If you don't know, Drew was on the podcast a little while back, and this is a great indirect crossover because he's talking about an episode that we did with a guy named Matt Sitman not too long after that.
The episode that he's referencing, in case you haven't heard it, the one from the episode about Matt Sitman, is that Matt wrote a piece for Dissent magazine saying that the left needs to cultivate a better moral grounding when it comes to, I think, their speech and their actions. Matt's piece focused a lot on like the rhetoric of different people on like the like Democrats or people on the left. But I think that Drew's question is pretty interesting nonetheless. I had to write them down because there were several. Keeping notes over here, making sure I can get them all. Well, we can get them all. I don't know, Dean, what do you think? So the first question he asked was, like, don't progressives or, like, leftists already take moral stances? Do they?
Yeah, I think so. We did ask Matt that question when he was on the podcast as well, and he said there was, like, a misleading title in some ways to say that the Democrats have a moral austerity, because they do kind of have their own particular morality. I guess the trouble is like getting into the specifics of that. Like, what are the moral or ethical positions of Democrats? I don't know. It's not quite clear to me. I guess some kind of vague, like, don't hurt other people kind of stance. Like, you know, I don't know. If it doesn't bother you, then, like, if it's not hurting anybody, then, like, don't worry about it. Like, that seems to be the kind of general vague principle. But, the point about them having morals anyway is pretty unassailable, I think. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's true. I think the question that Drew asked that really interests me is the one about meme culture and, like, the way that people, like, memeify.
Yeah, that's right.
Like stuff, like criticisms of the right get memeified for like easy consumption of people on the left to like kind of reify certain political positions, and that's really interesting, I think.
Yeah,
but I'm trying to think of like all of like the very liberal memes I've ever seen in my life, and probably a lot. To me, my like the lasting impression, the lingering impression I have of like the memification of liberal values, which is, I mean, a funny phrase to begin with, is that like they're usually like morally nitpicky and really focused on like low hanging fruit.
Right.
Like, I don't know. Oh man, Donald Trump says the fake, like, media is fake. Well, like, what about him lying about this thing? And it's like, you know, like, fine, like, that's true, that is like a moral point, but it's like so like minor and like rooted in like I don't know, in such a minor point, it just seems like not worth making almost, right? Like, yeah. the progressive like the moral stance that people on the left should take up is like poor people are good, and we should like we should give them like the ability to self-determine their lives. They should be in charge of their own labor. They shouldn't have to, like, I don't know, be in tons of medical debt. Like we should care for them, right? Like those type of moral stances aren't the things I see memeified or even taken up by like liberals or progressives. They're so focused on like the personality and like the stupid minutia of acts of like Donald Trump or something to really get into like all people should have the ability to go to the doctor. I don't know.
Right. Right. I don't know if you read the Itself blog, but Adam Kotsko recently had a post kind of talking about this exact problem, where the basic discourse on the right is that liberals are, I don't know, talking in some biased bubble that they get sucked in by propaganda, liberal propaganda, the mainstream media, etc. And there's no real critique to be made because it's like so brutally circular. But then liberal kind of discourse, as Adam Kotsko worked it out, is like you just assume that everybody is sort of basically liberal. It's just that some of them are extremely stupid, and those are Republicans. And then the rest of them are like enlightened and smart, and those are Democrats. And like you can't conceive of positions that fall outside of that, because the assumption is that if you were very smart, you would like vote for Hillary Clinton or something. And I think that's right.
Yeah, I mean, because liberal arguments are always appealing, not always, but are often appealing to sort of like really rational and moral frameworks. And like, if you could just make the smart enough argument, then people would just join your side, right? Like, if you could just introduce like really hard evidence that Donald Trump is like really a dumb and hateful guy, then like, of course conservatives would just join your side. But like, man, you can't do it because they're not smart enough or something.
Yeah, and that's like what the memes are after, right? Is boiling down what liberals think might be complex arguments into their most basic component parts, and then just like putting them on Facebook and hoping that your like conservative aunt sees it and then repents and doesn't vote for Republicans ever again.
Yeah, that's right. On this point, can I interject here a quote from somebody I really like?
You can. I'll allow it.
So this conversation reminds me of something that the popular author Tad DeLay, I don't know, I think he's an academic. He wrote a book recently called The Cynic and the Fool. He's like a guy that writes about theology and psychoanalysis, I think, a lot. Not super familiar with him, but I'm Facebook friends with him. So anyways, he posted this on Facebook, and I think it's a good quote and like worth saying. So Tad DeLay says, we'll have to tag him in this too. But anyways, Tad DeLay says, politics, like religion, is all about enjoyment. And we need to get better at analyzing the counterintuitive locations of that enjoyment. I have family members who support the GOP's healthcare bill even though they will almost surely die because of it. Liberals don't get this. Why? As best as I can tell, it's just it isn't just ignorance. To them, the spiteful destruction of the prior administration's legacy is worth the risk. Worth making worse and even dying for. Tell them we have 30-something examples of better healthcare from which we could model ours after. Doesn't matter. Cite the pre-ACA death toll and tell them 40,000 per year will die from this. Doesn't matter. We are in a war of affects, rage, anxiety, shame, and what people enjoy wins. Even if those wins will surely kill them. Liberals think we are in a battle of smart ideas versus dumb ideas, but that's not how enjoyment or the drive for repetition works. A fundamental and universal lesson of psychoanalysis is that people enjoy their illness. We create in the same way that we also destroy. We are sadistic because we are also masochistic. So it's this point that I think is kind of really good here. I think that liberals need to learn that like the smart idea, like have it, like good, have the smart idea, but like you're not going to win people over based on that smart idea. Like you're not going to win anyone over trying to show them how much smarter than you. Smarter than
well,
they
and
are.
the real irony is that like many liberal ideas are not actually that thought through, right? They're just as affective as the right. It's just that they don't take themselves to be playing the same game, and that's really the illness, I guess. The liberal illness is that they think that they're extremely smart by advocating for like the ACA and explicitly not advocating for, say, single payer healthcare or something like that. And that's the craziness of it, is like it isn't a game of wits. It's still a game of affect on either party or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. So I don't know. That's what I'd say about like progressive or like center left, like or left leaning liberals or like moral positions. Just that the morality they're appealing to is about like outsmarting someone when it should be about like enjoyment or some other type of affective desire, because those are the ones that mobilize people.
Yeah. Just picking up on the last bit of Drew's voicemail, as far as like a specific moral program that is or should be on the left, like Drew mentioned utilitarianism. I mean, I don't know, maybe there's something about that in certain leftist discourses, but I'm not really an ethicist, so maybe I shouldn't like talk too much about it because I'll get in trouble by being extremely wrong. But I guess I don't really feel like there's a kind of common ethical or moral core at the bottom of the left per se. I guess I just feel like it's more like, well, we should abolish private property because like that is clearly not a world that people want to live in. Maybe some people think that that's like on utilitarian grounds. They're like, well, that we should maximize the most justice or something. Maybe some people feel like it's on the grounds of, I don't know, like Drew mentioned care ethics or something. Maybe people don't care at all about like utilitarianism. It's just purely, you know, this is the right thing to do or something, or deontological or whatever. But I guess, yeah, it just seems to me like there's no real overriding controlling morality underneath.
Well, isn't there though? Isn't there like, I think that we can locate like at least one ethical goal within leftist ideologies. Like, regardless whether or not you're like a communist or an anarchist or whatever, like it seems like the left is basically after like the dignity of all people, like to control their own labor and to self-determine their life. Like that's an ethical claim, isn't it?
Certainly an ethical claim, but not an ethical framework in itself. Like, you can get to that ethical claim from a variety of frameworks.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. That you're right. That's not a utilitarian value or a deontological value or something. That's just like a thing that people want. Yeah, it's a value. I don't know. It's a value that people want. Like that's good. Yeah, but you're right. There's no established way that leftists think about that value or how to achieve that value.
Yeah, and that's a good thing. Like, let many ethical paradigms bloom, I guess, as long as we abolish private property.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, so we've got a great we had a great voicemail from Drew, but what else do we have in the docket here?
Yeah, there's actually 2 more voicemails from our good Twitter friend Liam, at Liam Rules, I think is his Twitter handle. If it's not,
nice.
Sorry for diluting your brand. Anyways, there are 2, and I think let's listen to them both right quick and see what Liam has to say. Is that cool?
Yeah, totally cool.
Hey, Magnificast guys, this is Liam, at Liam Rules on Twitter. I probably should have made sure I knew what I was going to say before I called. I just got really excited this thing existed. But I've been listening to y'all for a little bit, and I specifically have been listening just before I go. I've been asked to guest preach a few times at this church, and guest preaching is kind of weird for me. My wife is a pastor, but I have not really been as active in church, and people come to me and ask me to preach, I guess because I'm pretty good at it, but I'm not always sure what to say. I want to be hospitable, even though I'm being welcomed into their space. I want to be understanding of that congregation and not maybe blow their minds unexpectedly with something that they weren't ready for. On the other hand, I'm going to be myself. I don't know how to not be myself. And oddly enough, it hasn't been that big of a problem in the past. I've managed to share something that I think is real and meaningful without necessarily upsetting anyone too much. And yet today's the Sunday after things in Charlottesville sort of went down, and it's hard to know. To me, it's the least controversial thing I could do, is get up and condemn white supremacy. And yet here I am going into this rural Pennsylvania church. I don't actually know what they're going to say. I don't know how they're going to respond. My guess is they're not probably going to be blatantly like, oh, wait, no, I love white supremacy. But I am worried that they're going to be offended, or they're going to be fragile. They're going to worry that I'm targeting them unfairly somehow by preaching against the oppressive white regime that we live in. Hey, y'all, it's Liam again. So I went to that church, and I promised this session would be shorter. But basically, I went, and I didn't edit myself, and I preached what I wanted to preach. Which, again, preaching is fraught for me, and I'm not sure that I really theologically connect with everybody, but I find something, and I said what I needed to say, and I was honest about the legacy of white supremacy in the church, and I was honest about wanting a different world for my daughter and all those things. And that I was worried. And I don't know why I was so worried. Because it was great. And I was great. And the church was fine. And I don't know. I didn't do a survey. And maybe there were people who were uptight or offended. They didn't say anything to me about it. So why am I afraid? And this is the most important part. I'm also not afraid. Like, I guess what I was more afraid of was being afraid that I would get up in the pulpit and I wouldn't say everything that I wanted to say because I'd be afraid. But when I'm actually in the pulpit, I'm not actually afraid at all. I just say whatever I want. And who gives a fuck? I don't care what they think. I just say it. And I don't know why I thought I was going to be a scaredy cat. So, anyways, I just thought you should get the follow-ups. That's it. Your show is about me. But I think, that idea of like, well, why are we afraid to say things in church? I mean, I guess it could have gone terribly and I could have been let out on a rail, but I wasn't. So that's great. Forget about it.
This is very good. I like both of these, actually.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so Liam's question was, like, how do you navigate church situations? And I think Liam answers his own question. I was just like, I don't know, I guess you just do it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. It's very funny that, first of all, I find it very funny that any pastor would, like, ask me for advice, because I am not one on purpose. Not a pastor on purpose, that is. I did, though. My first major when I was an undergraduate was youth ministry, so could have been me, but snuck out the back door of that program.
Nice. Yeah. Good.
Yeah, but that's really fascinating. I don't know. I can't imagine having to like come up with a sermon after Charlottesville on Sunday.
Yeah. Like
presumably you would have had something prepared that you thought about already and like worked on, and then
on Saturday it's all ruined, right?
Exactly. Just like all the shit hits the fan, and you gotta, I don't know, say something meaningful about something that's like very dangerous to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kudos to you, Liam, for doing it. I guess like that. I would have been very afraid as well.
Yeah, I had to preach in church one time. It wasn't great. Luckily, nothing catastrophically bad happened right before I did it, so I could just kind of do my thing.
Got that going for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. The larger question Liam asked is kind of hard, though. Okay, he's going to like a rural Pennsylvania church, and like, how do you, like, be a Christian in those spaces where like, white supremacy, probably not like, where white supremacy probably isn't like, overtly sort of the norm, but still like white supremacy is like structurally the norm.
Right.
How do you interact with Christians in those spaces? How do you interact with Christians who are more conservative than you? I don't know how to do that. I'm probably not very good.
Especially if it's not your home congregation or something.
Yeah.
Because white supremacy is already like it is a feature of Christianity in the United States, not a bug. You could say.
Yeah.
So it's hard to imagine going into a group of Christians that you've never met when Christians statistically all voted for Donald Trump. That would be pretty horrifying.
Yeah. I mean, I guess taking a note from Matt Sitman, though, I mean, you can speak a very similar moral language.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, supposedly. Trying to draw that common Christian, like moral Christian language out into some more radical ends, I think is probably the way to go. But still a very hard thing to do.
Yeah. I'm curious to hear, Leah mentioned that his wife is a pastor as well, and I wonder if she also did a sermon that Sunday and what that would have been like. I mean, maybe she didn't, but like, Liam, if you're listening, it would be cool to kind of hear about that. Actually, like, I feel like it would be strange to compare notes of being like, what are you going to say tomorrow in the sermon after Charlottesville? That would be a hard thing to sort through together, I would guess.
Yeah. Did you go to church that Sunday after Charlottesville?
I didn't, and it was purely out of, like, I don't know, just not feeling up for it. Like, I didn't feel like I was going to have a great time, so slept in that day.
Yeah, good choice. I went, and at my church we always have, like, revolving speakers from the community, and it wasn't a great sermon.
Yeah.
It like, only kind of tangentially touched on the issues from the day before. So I don't know. It's probably a very hard thing to do.
Yeah, it's a tough thing. I mean, one thing that is both nice and not nice about being Catholic in Canada as an American citizen is, like, my parish isn't really connected with what's happening in my country. It could be. I mean, there are priests in Toronto, I know, who take a stronger interest in that kind of thing, but not at my parish, which is like a block away, which is why I go there. And yeah, it can just be sort of alienating sometimes when you're like there at mass and nobody's really clued into what's going on, and you kind of show up and do your thing and go home. I mean, the mass is good. Like, I like mass a lot, but you know, it's just a strange space. So how do you navigate? I don't know. I think like it's important to give yourself permission to like not do it sometimes. That helps me anyway. Like, Christianity is really annoying. It's like very good and beautiful and like helpful, but also extremely annoying and exhausting. Yeah, I don't know. It would be great though to get like other pastors' perspectives on things like this. I feel like we talked to John Thornton Jr. a long time ago about Rod Dreher, and I would love to hear what John had to say about Charlottesville and his own congregation, or even like folks who are, I don't know, trying to figure that out in theology or whatever. Like, we get people to talk about things and ideas and issues here, but I guess we've never really had anybody talk about their own church life and how their churches are negotiating these kinds of issues or whatnot.
Introducing the first ever Magnificast Theory Time featuring Jon Greenaway / Litcrit Guy. That's the theme song. Anyways, here's a recording that we did with John a few days ago, where we asked him a question. We asked him what Marx's theory of revolution was, and John gave an answer that was very good.
To understand the kind of Marxist conception of revolution, you kind of first have to grasp that Marx is extremely interested in history, and especially in the different phases of how societies develop. There's this great quote from Engels where he says that Marx's genius was that he grasped that before man can practice art, politics, philosophy, or religion, he must first provide food for himself and have somewhere to live. And so everything in Marx's work proceeds from this very simple idea that firstly, material needs determine a lot of kind of social and political relations. There's this idea that we're taught that history just like kind of happens, that like great ideas exist in the world, but Marx always grounds all of that in kind of very concrete terms. And his point is that as society develops, there are new forms of technology that help us to meet our needs in new ways come into being. So he details like kind of three historical models that we've moved through, and that is the kind of ancient mode of production where the primary relationship is the master versus the slave. This then shifts into feudal production, where it is the lord controlling the work and the labor of peasants or serfs. And then it moves again forward in history into capitalist production, where you have capitalists exploiting the kind of free wage labor of the working class. So why this is important is that as technology and the means of meeting our needs more efficiently advances and changes, that will inevitably come into conflict with the ways in which society is currently organized. This is what Marx, eventually these contradictions will kind of meet until the only solution is what Marx calls a revolutionary reconstitution of society. And this is where the idea of revolution comes in. The contradictions of the current arrangement, the current configuration of these economic and productive forces comes into conflict with the ways in which technology and labor has advanced. So the kind of modern example of this would be the idea that at the moment, automation could potentially provide everything that we need, but at the same time, that would render a lot of people unemployed. So something has to happen here. Something has to give on one side of that equation. But here's why here's where people kind of sometimes misunderstand what Marx said. Marx said that eventually the contradictions of capitalism would reach a point where it would break down, and that we would have communism. Communism would take us beyond capitalism, because the forces of technology would eventually be being held back by the way that society and the economy is structured and organized. Now, a lot of people take that to mean that Marx thought revolution was inevitable, but that is kind of unfair, I think, and misses a lot of what Marx was actually driving at. What determines the revolutionary reconstitution of society is the class struggle, and that is the way in which the proletariat, in this case, is put into conflict with the owners of the means of production. The class struggle in itself is not an inevitable thing. It isn't something that is going to happen. Like, it's not a kind of like oncoming apocalyptic end of the world thing. What's important to note is that we kind of it has to be struggled with, and there is no guarantees. The class struggle is the means by which we can transition society, that we can revolutionize it, that we can remake it into something new. But what I wanted to do was share a quick quote from Engels, who wrote in a letter after Marx's death. The economic situation is the basis, the foundation of things, as it were, for the various elements of the superstructure, the political forms of the class struggle, and its results also exercise their influence upon the course of the historical struggle, and in many cases preponderate in determining their form. So this idea that, communism is eventually going to break through anyway because of the contradictions inherent in capitalism is not true. Engels and Marx knew that the class struggle is impactful, which is why it is so important. Marx famously wrote that perhaps only in England could a non-violent transition to communism occur because of its well-organized labor movement. And it was in labor movements and sort of trade unions and other collective forms that Marx argued that the working class would come to recognize itself not just as a class in itself, but against something else. But whether that revolution, whether that transition to communism, to going beyond capitalism, is possible without violence, is something that's much more difficult to answer accurately. How does that kind of work as a brief, off the top of my head overview of Marx's revolution?
That's great.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's way more articulated than off the top things that we do in every single episode of our podcast.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
The final thing that I would say that I would want to chip in is to connect this idea of the kind of revolutionary rearticulation of society that Marx writes about with the Christian concept of metanoia, which is usually translated as repentance or as penitence, but I think is much more accurately translated as the remaking of oneself, the remaking of one's behavior, and the remaking of the world. So there is no real... Marx thought that revolution was historically determined by shifts between productive modes. Lenin would go further, of course, and say that revolution could be built with a good vanguard party that would raise the class consciousness of the proletariat. But I would also say that it can be connected to the outworking of Christian life as well. That good Christianity, Christian discipleship is in a sense about remaking the world, which shares a lot in common, just even on a linguistic level, with the language that Marx and Engels use in the Communist Manifesto.
Okay, cool. So that's a lot of very good and well-formulated thoughts on Marx and revolution, and that should give you a pretty good groundwork, or at least a good place to start if you've never really thought about revolutions before. There you go. So maybe we can think through what John said and like what we know about Marx ourselves, in terms of like some objections people have to it. Maybe that's a good way of kind of parsing out what's at stake with like understanding revolutions and like why they're important for us. Does that sound good?
Yeah, I think so. It does. And that's what we did last time. I think it worked pretty well on the Christianity and Socialism 101 episode.
Right. I think so too. Okay, so just a few moments ago, someone actually left a comment on our Facebook page about the last episode we did, basically saying like, well, first of all, this person I don't think listened to the episode, but if they did, then I don't know, cool. I mean, you can be critical, but again, keep those to yourself. No, just kidding. Anyways, this person on Facebook just said, literally 30 seconds ago, like, no violence can be justified. Violence is always bad. People are very concerned about violence. If you listen to the last episode, I feel like we talked about that a lot, but maybe we can talk about it a little bit more. What can we say about...
It's interesting to ask about it in the context of revolutions in particular, because that's what makes people really uneasy.
Yeah.
Like, even if you're for violence, you're not like a strict pacifist or whatever, the minute someone's like, yeah, what about revolution? Most of the time people are like, whoa, hey, don't get carried away here. Like, we all know what happens then. And the thing is, we don't know what always happens then. So let's talk about that. Yeah, so violence is bad. What do you say, Matt? If someone, when you're talking to your average Joe, your average church-going Joseph, and he says, hey, I heard you were a communist. What the heck? Violence is super bad, and revolutions are violent, and that's not good. What do you say to anti-communist Joseph?
I'd say, yeah, man, violence sucks. Like, I'm not a fan. Yeah, violence isn't cool. Like, I don't like that. I don't like when people get killed or hurt. That's not very fun. But in revolutions, like, it happens, and the point, I think, isn't to like justify a revolution as good or bad, but at the same time, you have to look at that and think like, will less violence be done after the old society is pushed away? Probably.
Right.
I mean, capitalism is a system that is built on a certain type of structural violence and exclusion. So would a revolution to abolish capitalism be violent? Like, yeah, probably. Is that violence justified if it brings about a better world? Yeah, probably. I don't know. I don't want anyone to die ever, and we could just all live immortally forever in robot bodies. But I don't know. I think that sometimes violence is justified.
That's my new concept album.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Violence is justifiable when it's on the side of the oppressed, and it makes life better for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's right. Kind of flipping the question back, I guess, is important to say, well, if you think violence is bad, then what are you going to do about all the violence that happens every single day by virtue of the system that we currently have?
Yeah.
That's a really helpful way to go about it. But one other interesting thing is, like, just pulling the reins a little bit on the assumption that, like, revolutions are qualified by, you know, the amount of violence that is required to bring them about or something. Because, like the Bolshevik Revolution is a really famous example because it's like surprisingly bloodless at first, and it only gets like really intense when there's a civil war in Russia, because basically all these like bourgeois countries start sending money to Russia because they don't want to deal with proletarian revolutions in their own countries, so you got to ruin it somewhere else. But that's the thing, right? Is like a lot of the leaders of the Russian Revolution were basically elected by workers' councils, and people were like on board, and they're like, yeah, this is what we actually want. Like, most of us want a better life, and that was like a really interesting process. So, you know, one question is just asking, like, why do some revolutions get violent? And in a case like Russia, at least as it spun itself out, like, it got violent because some people didn't want to give up their privilege.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and like you said too, like, violence is at the bottom of a lot of things in the capitalist political economy, and we don't seem to be bothered by violence in that context, right? Like, the violence of everyday life we ignore, probably because we don't experience it, or if we do, we can contextualize it or something as like not violence. Only when it comes to like the self-determination of proletarians do people get really upset about violence.
Yeah, it's also really interesting because, like, most people, even if they don't know that they do, they implicitly accept the assumption that like a society can distance itself from its violent beginnings. Like if you're an American citizen and you think that things are going okay, well, like I hate to break it to you, but your country is based on like a violent war that like decided they didn't want to do something. They didn't want to be, British subjects anymore. So they had a whole violent revolution and like people, died and like fought and all that kind of stuff. And now here we are, like because of that. So I don't know. It's not like those things should be celebrated, even though the country does celebrate it once a year, every year. But nevertheless, like people have found a way to, understand that violence, separate themselves from it a little bit, and nevertheless enjoy the fruits of that like completely different society.
Isn't it kind of weird though too that like, I mean, speaking of celebrating revolutions, I mean the United States is a country that's founded in a revolution, and no one gets like bent out of shape about that.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, they get bent out of shape if you don't like it.
Yeah, I know, right? Like the 4th of July is specifically about that revolution, and we're supposed to be patriotic on that day. But people, that revolution is good. It's contextualized. It's a long time ago. But it was actually super violent.
Yeah, and it's also interesting the way that the history of revolutions get told, right? Because like the American Revolution, pretty good. In most people's minds. French Revolution, kind of okay, a little bit scary, but like worked out for the better in the end. And then like nobody talks about like the Haitian Revolution. Like if you're a black slave and you decide like you don't want things the way that they are and you succeed, like, well, I don't know, we don't like that revolution. Like that's bad news. And that's kind of a crazy thing, that revolutions where bourgeois white people decide what they want to do and then continue to exploit other people, like those revolutions are fine. But revolutions where like oppressed people actually try to do something for themselves, like those are held to kind of impossible ethical standards.
Yeah, that's right. Quick side note, I encourage all of our listeners to go check out the podcast Revolutions. It's like a history podcast about revolutions. They have an entire series that's about the Haitian Revolution, and it's super interesting and really good. But quick disclaimer, it is a history podcast, and it is very boring.
I don't know. The Barricades episode is really fun.
Yeah, it is. It's super fun. I think they're all great, but also, like, I don't know. I have a PhD.
It is like listening to
like
someone reading a paper.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's good though. Revolutions. It's good. Every episode's good. It's all super interesting. There's like an entire series about Bolivar too. That's really cool.
Yeah, that's right.
Dude, it's sweet. It's a good podcast. It's not even like leftist. It's just like history stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, so one of the things I always think about this when I think about violence and revolution in particular, Frantz Fanon, who, if you don't know who Frantz Fanon is, he's one of the like primary decolonial theorists of the last century. In his book, The Wretched of the Earth, he has a chapter called On Violence right up at the beginning. And I'm always struck by, I think it's like the first or second page, he says that decolonizing is about the idea that the last will be first. And like basing it in that kind of extremely Christian, maxim or axiom or whatever is kind of an interesting way to think about what revolutions are trying to do. Like they're trying to build the kingdom of God on earth for a second. And that means that like the people who've been on the bottom, they've got to be raised up, just like that's like a common trope in biblical literature.
Yeah, that's cool. That's actually a really interesting way of putting it. Quick book recommendation. Read Wretched of the Earth. Second quick book recommendation. There's this really great book from Julia Kristeva, who's like, she's French and, I don't know, does a lot of stuff with psychoanalysis. She has a book called Revolt, she said. And the beginning is like an etymology of the word revolution. And, it's really interesting. Lots of cool stuff going on there. But one of the etymologies she pulls out about revolution is about like, is sort of like the turning against, or like the sort of like revolution in the sense of like, one revolution of like a wheel or something going around. And it has that same kind of connotation though, where like, the end, like one part of the wheel is now on top, whereas the other end of the wheel is on bottom. So that's cool.
Yeah, it is. It is cool. Okay, so like, I feel like the violent revolution is bad argument is just generally not great. Not from your average Joe, anyway.
It's just morally inconsistent. It doesn't. It's not a consistent worldview to think that that revolutionary violence is always bad or something. I mean, if you're a strict pacifist, I guess fine. You can probably make some kind of claims there, but you have to figure out what to do with the violence of everyday life, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I have respect for pacifists who at least trouble the waters a little bit, and they're like, well, the American Revolution was bad too. And, you know, you can ask all kinds of, like, critical questions about that. But at least it's, like, a principled thing that people understand is frustrating and hard and, like, stupid and difficult. Right. In the way that, like, all theory is stupid and difficult. But,
like, whereas reactionary, liberal opposition to, like, all violence is just bad because, like, I don't know, think about the civil rights movement or something. The uncritical rejection of violence, like the dude on Facebook, or whatever.
Yeah. Bad news. Don't do that.
Bad news.
Okay, so another objection that at least like I've heard in kind of everyday life or conversation is, well, real change takes a lot of time. You're not going to change everything overnight, so like revolution is bad news. Yeah, I don't know. That's something that I often hear from peers or people who like find out that you're a communist or something like that. What do you think about that, Matt? Does real change take time? What does revolution take time? What's all that about?
It's such a weird thing to say. Like, I don't know, the unfolding of history, it does occur in time. It takes exactly as much time as it ought to. I don't know, like, what a weird thing to say. Like, yeah, I mean, time passes, things happen. Change happens sequentially, one after another. Yeah, real change does take time. Revolutions also take time. It's when does a revolution start? Like, when does a revolution end? Does it end? Who knows, right? This is something we talked about last week with that the Richard Gilman-Opolsky book. But like protests, riots, uprisings, revolutions, they don't happen inside of a bubble. They don't happen like very frictionlessly. They are the very patient summation of systemic and unbearable violence over time. Here's a quote from Marx that I think is probably good that we can mention here. So in an essay from Marx and Engels called The Holy Family, Marx and Engels say this: in the life conditions of the proletariat, all the life conditions of modern society are contained in their most inhuman acuteness, because man himself is lost in it. So the point here is that, like, revolutions don't just, like, occur. They don't just occur when people think, like, oh, man, time for a revolution, better get in the streets or whatever. Revolutions happen predicated on, like, the most inhuman aspects of modern society, right? It's like the summation of all of this, like, bad exploitative stuff that capitalism does to workers. And then, like, revolution happens when, like, they can't take it anymore and you have to do something else. Right. To continue this quote even a little bit further from the same essay, the impossibility of avoiding or prettifying any longer the absolutely imperative misery, the practical expression of necessity, he is also directly driven to rebellion against all of this inhumanity. Right? This inhumanity of capitalism is what drives the proletariat against capitalism itself. Like, so it's again the summation of all of these things over periods of time that make a revolution happen. So, right. Not only does change take a long time, but revolutions take a long time. And like we said last week, revolutions or like uprisings, they might actually be very patient. People have waited a long time to get this stuff out, you know?
Yeah, I think that's the other part is the politics of time. Like, some people don't have time. It's really easy to say real change takes time when that change doesn't really affect you immediately in the way that you need it to. But it's a lot harder when, you know, you are, for example, a person of color in the United States, and it's likely that you're probably going to get incarcerated or, you know, shot just on like a routine event. Like, you don't have time. That's not really like a thing that is fair. Like, I always think of the obvious one is Martin Luther King Jr.'s comments about white moderates, right? Where it's like, well, yeah, we don't have time for that. We don't have time for the moderate change and those kinds of reforms. It's not strategically useful, and you can say that forever. And the question is like, yeah, but when are you going to do something, right? And that's when you kind of make an intervention. And I think that's just like an important point. Like, you can't really say, well, real change takes time, it doesn't happen overnight, and that's why, you know, the intense gradualism of liberalism is okay. Like, that's ignoring all the people who actually are getting run over every day by it.
Like, doesn't the gradualism of liberalism seem like the most hateful ideology you could possibly tell somebody? Like,
absolutely.
It's literally, it's like saying that revolutions, oh man, that won't work. You should just wait for real change because things happen just incrementally, slowly over time. Like, you're literally asking people to shut up and suffer. Like, well, man, exactly. You know, you could be violent right now, but you could also just stop talking and just suffer, right? Like, sorry, man, that's your lot in life, to live a really terrible, crappy life. Like, that's just the way it is.
Yeah, you got born too early.
Yeah. So anyways, liberals, don't at me about this because this is so dumb and wrong, and you shouldn't say this to people.
Yeah, it also reminds me, Walter Benjamin has this quote somewhere. It's escaping me right now, but he says, revolution isn't like a runaway train. It's actually hitting the brake really hard on the runaway train that is like global capitalism. And I think that is a very important metaphor for the left.
And we can't even mention the word train without saying Paul Virilio. What's up? Hey, Paul Virilio alert.
Virilio horns.
Virilio horns. Very, very slow air horns.
That's right.
Right. Revolutions aren't the thing that are going too fast. It's capitalism that goes too fast, right? It's like the extreme breakneck speed that capitalism operates at that causes so much problem in the first place.
It's like Marx and Engels say in the manifesto, right, that the bourgeois class, they're kind of the real revolutionary class. They just keep creating these material conditions that regularly redistribute whatever's happening in society in ways that aren't necessarily good or smart. Okay,
so I think those are some good objections or places to start kind of interrogating the idea of revolution. It seems for Christianity, for Christians, okay, if you're skeptical of violence, good, you probably should be. At the same time, it seems like there are some places where violence can be justified, and I think revolutions are probably one of them.
Footnote though is, I think it's important to mention that like communism and socialism, there's nothing about those ideologies that necessitate violence or even violent revolutions. In fact, Marx himself says that in the United States and England, and he says maybe Holland at the time, he says that there could have been a nonviolent transition to communism. And, it's kind of a throwaway remark, but it's one that a lot of Marxists know because it's a very important point that Marx thinks it's very likely that you're going to have revolutions all over the place, but he leaves the door open for assuming that there could be other kinds of changes. But the real temptation, I guess, to avoid is to use that as a door that swings wide open to reformism and gets you out of revolutionary commitments. Because at the end of the day, the idea is you would have to find a nonviolent way to transition from an economy that is completely enshrined on the entire planet right now. And that's really hard work.
Right. The reason that Marx thinks that revolution or a violent revolution isn't necessary in England is because there's strong trade unions or something, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So liberals, if you are afraid of revolution or you don't want them, I don't know, I guess you just have to unionize. That's really the only solution, right? If you don't want a violent revolution, then you need to find ways for transition. To give workers more power.
Yeah, and that's a perennial Marxist problem, but not one that Marxists haven't dealt with. I always think about Rosa Luxemburg, who famously wrote this essay on reformism and revolution, where she says, if people make reforms that benefit working people's lives, of course, revolutionaries should support that. We don't want life to be worse off for people, so if liberals are going to throw the working class a bone, then take it. But her whole point is, use those as stepping stones to an actual revolutionary future. Don't see them as victories. That's like the one thing that separates, for example, I think Democrats in the United States from an actual leftist movement. Like they're so content to celebrate something like the like Affordable Health Care Act or whatever. And it's like, that's not a victory. That's like one tiny thing that saved some like significant people's lives and like did not deliver. Like we're not in a revolutionary situation. So like don't be proud of it. Just be like, wow, that like it's a good thing we put like a tiny bit of the brake on just that.
Yeah, that's right.
I guess like the point that I'm trying to make is like most people don't hate revolution per se, they just hate socialism. Like no matter how you get there, violent or non-violent, that's the thing that people are upset about. And it's just important to disentangle that because revolution is like a necessary part of Marxist theory. It's not a thing that Marxist theory is reducible to per se, but nevertheless, like socialism, that's where the key arguments take place.
On that point about people hating revolution or socialism, that makes me think of a quote again from our current favorite book, Spectres of Revolt by Richard Gilman Opolsky. I have not told him that we've talked about him 3 times now, probably this podcast. I'll send him an email. Anyways, this is from the chapter that he wrote called "The Ferguson Revolt Did Not Take Place." It's in the article we posted last week. It's in the tiny letter. You can look back to it. Anyways, here's the quote: "Those who condemn the revolts actually love them because they get to condemn a violence that justifies the violence they defend, the violence they love. Critics of revolt do not, therefore, fear the violence, but rather the transformative potentialities of revolt, its abolitionist and creative content. Their wager and hope is that nothing they love will be abolished, that the present state of things will be defended against every revolt, and if the existing order is maintained against revolt, as it often is, that existing order will be haunted by the specters of future revolt." Okay, so this is like a really good quote because I think it exposes a few things about revolt. First of all, they always come back. That's a pretty important point, again and again, right? Like the uprising in Ferguson is connected to the uprising in Baltimore. We talked about that last week. But that people they love to hate the violence because it gives them something again, like to fight against, something to complain about.
Yeah.
A way to justify the continuation of the everyday violence of capitalism. People love that.
Yeah, it's like on Twitter watching all the intentional centrists, the alt-center, if you will.
That's right.
Like, they coined this term, the alt-left, right? Precisely so that they can call themselves something else and different and kind of build this whole identity around, escaping whatever, the problems of violence in their own society, the problems of violence that are raised by white supremacy and by resistance to it. You can't have the center without the hatred of the left.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of memes and the memification of, I guess, moral sentiment, liberals hate socialism more than fascists.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the fact that even when you're facing down fascists in a discourse or something, or on the ground or whatever, the fact that like that's exactly the time that so many centrists think that it's especially important to distinguish themselves from the left is exactly what's wrong with all of politics.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this episode. We've gone from user-submitted content, iTunes reviews, questions about ethics, what do you do in church, and finally some like really good stuff from Jon Greenaway, and some other really good stuff from the equally good philosopher Karl Marx. Equally good as Jon Greenaway, that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah, cool.
It's hard to do. It's no small task to be as good as Jon Greenaway. So kudos to you, Marx.
Yeah, no kidding. You're there. You've arrived. If you can, you should support John the Lit Guy Greenaway on Twitter or on what's the other website where you can buy him coffee?
I don't know, but he does have a Patreon account.
Yeah, he does. He does have a Patreon account. We'll post some links and places you can support him and give him money and buy him coffee because if anyone deserves it, it's probably him. So you should really do that. Okay, Well, thanks for listening to this episode of the Magnificast. As usual, subscribe to our podcast. Give us a review on iTunes. Follow us on Twitter. Hashtag us. Help build our brand. Give us some good SEO. I don't know what any of those words are really mean, but do them for us.
Also, give us a call, especially if you're a pastor. I don't know. Call us and set us straight about what's going on at church.
Please.
That would be helpful.
Tell us how to do it. Tell us how we do this church thing.
Tell us how to also just, better help you communize your church, and then you can pastor us. It'll be a totally mutual, beneficial, symbiotic relationship here.
Yeah, that sounds good. All right, thanks for listening.
There we'll swim with all creation, never get tired, never bored, don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up, keep your hoods up, and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up, well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. Oh, don't mind a cold night, but we might mind if you leave too soon. So come on now, it's still early. At least what else are you gonna do? As we kissed in the alley by the Michigan Theater, fall snow was glowing in the lights of the downtown. Saw a spark in your eyes, I just spoke it. Said we're gonna turn this whole place upside down.